and a legal and social science perspective course organized by Center for Disability Research and Training, KMC, in collaboration with NCPEDP. It is a great pleasure and honor to welcome our speaker for the day, Ms. Bhavya Jain. Ms. Bhavya is a graduate from the Department of Social Work, University of Delhi. She is currently pursuing PhD from TISS Mumbai, from where she also completed her MPhil with a grassroots development organization, Pradhan, in Madhya Pradesh. She is also a Newton Baba Fellow 2021 for Social Science Research for UK-India Exchange. Looking forward to your presence, ma'am. And the floor is now over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. I hope you're ready for a session which is on Introduction to Social Research. I will start shortly. And while I'm presenting, I will keep my video off. I hope that's okay to minimize distractions. And yeah, before I start, just one thing, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. We'll also have some time in the end so that we can have a discussion if needed. And I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. But still, if you have any questions or if there's anything that's not clear, please feel free. Give me a second before I start.
I have to say something. Can everybody please have their mics off? Because I'm getting a lot of static and I can't hear the speaker properly. Thank you.
So I hope everybody can see my screen. Is it?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, thank you. Let's start. So just before I start, I'll just set some scope and limitations on what this presentation is going to be about. It's just an introductory session on social research, which will majorly deal with the types of social research for this session. And I'll go into a little bit into the process and the methods and tools that are applied in social research. Or detail, and it will not cover all the minute methodologies and different types of social research that exist. However, it's just to give you an introduction so that you are aware of what different kinds of researches exist. It may not cover everything, but yeah, I will try to cover the most common forms. And you can always pop something in the chat if you want to ask or anything. So yeah, be comfortable with that. And before I start, I would just, if any of you would actually like to engage and say, what do you think is research? Anybody, anything, what do you think it is? Or what does somebody mean when they say, we are researching
investigate anything?
Okay, investigate.
Hello,
Anything else?
Research means, ma'am, filling the existing gap in the knowledge. Try to fill an existing gap in the knowledge.
Okay, so yeah, those are two very good, very good explanations of what research is. It definitely tries to fill gaps in our knowledge regarding any issue, and it is investigating some area or some issue which we want to learn more about. So it is, as somebody said, investigate. So it is a study for discovery of new knowledge, or maybe for, verifying the already held knowledge that we have. It is evidence-based, that is, it's not completely observational or just based on personal experience. There is a lot of evidence which backs what our research findings are about. And it is scientific in the sense that it adheres to certain reasoning. It is critical. When I say critical, I mean it considers minute details of what is being studied, and how is it affected by the context, or does it make sense? Why is it what we see? Why is it being said like that? And things like that. There are set procedures that research follows. It is very, very critical for research to follow certain set procedures to ensure that it is scientific, it is evidence-based, and it is reliable. And it's a rigorous process. When I say rigorous, again, it means there are certain procedures, there are certain sets of rules that one has to follow when they are doing research. So the word scientific here does not really adhere to the discipline of science, as in physics, chemistry, bio, or all of that. Scientific here refers to the methodology, the approach that we adopt when we do a research. So the knowledge that we gain from research is different from what we may know from personal experience. It may be different from what we know through expert knowledges. It may be different from the popular beliefs that we hold and from the ideological values that we may believe in or we may have. So all these forms are also forms of knowledge, but they are not researches. Okay. So for example, from personal experience, I may know that walking, if I walk too much, my legs pain. And I may assume that if anybody walks too much, their legs may pain. However, this is not research backed. This may not be true. This might be something which is very personal to me due to whatever body features or health status or my personal things. Then expert knowledge is actually something which the expert that we are following might have that knowledge through research or through study or through their educational training, but that is not equivalent to research, because it's a secondary source to us. Okay, it's not directly researched or reached through certain procedures or whatever. We believe it because we believe in the expert we are listening to. Popular beliefs may be true, may not be true. Okay, for example, a very popular belief is regarding the dichotomy of the left and the right brain. We often hear that the left brain controls the creative side of us, while the right brain is more analytical and that sort of thing. But that's not true. That's not completely backed by research till now. It's just a popular belief that we hold. Similarly, ideological values, they may differ from person to person. I may believe in something because I adhere to a certain religion, I could come from a certain context, while that might not be true if done through a research, or that might not be the belief of a lot of other people. For example, I believe that if I wake up early, that makes me healthier. It might be true, it may not be true, but then if it is true or not can be only established by doing a well-set research which has which follows certain procedures, certain rules, certain measures, and reaches that conclusion. And why is research important? So it is important to reduce overgeneralizations, to counter false beliefs, to counter false consensus. False consensus is when we believe that something that we know to be true, everybody else also thinks is true. For example, as I said, I believe that waking up early is healthier and makes me more productive, so I may believe that it makes everybody more productive. However, that might not be true. That might not work the same for everybody. Selective generalization is when we actually associate certain characteristics or certain traits or certain beliefs with only some population. For example, I may believe that people from a certain place have a very bad attitude, and I may associate all of the people from that particular place to be with bad attitude. However, that might not be true, and bad attitude may not have to do anything with their place of belonging. It helps to reduce halo effect. Halo effect is when we actually believe in somebody just because we believe them to be an expert, or to be very knowledgeable, or we follow them, a particular leader, maybe a religious leader, maybe a teacher, for example. So we may just blindly follow what they say. However, not everything they say might be true, and it helps to reduce our own biases. So if we are biased towards certain things, we might counter biased beliefs through research. For example, if I believe that a certain community is more aggressive, that's my personal bias, because maybe that's what I have seen in my immediate environment or context, and through personal experience that I've come to believe that. Or maybe it's not even personal experience, I've just come to believe that because of hearsay. But then when there is some research being done on that community, or if I do some research on that community, and I then learn that, okay, that's not true, that was just a bias. And it obviously helps in measuring impact of a certain program, certain drug. We all know that a lot of research is done in the medical sciences. It also helps in establishing cause and effect, whether something causes something or not, whether some things are related with something or not. For example, is coffee related to bad sleep, or is exercise related to higher brain activity? All of this can be established through research and is established. Now coming to social research, as I said, this presentation is regarding social research. So social research, to be in very simple words, deals with social phenomena or aspects. Social, when I say social, it actually deals with anything where the human community, human beings are involved. Our environment, it may include the economy, it may include history, it may include the law, the legal system. So when we are doing research with the different social units, it's basically social research. Any questions for now? I hope it's clear. If there are any questions for now, please let me know. No, is it okay if I move forward then? So before we get into the types of research, there are certain terms that I would like to discuss here, because I am not sure what all of yours background is. But if we are talking about research, there are some terms which will come up again and again, and I would like you to know meanings of those. Yeah. So first of all is data. So data is any information that we use as evidence for analysis, or for running various analysis through statistics or other methods that we'll discuss in the next session. So basically, data is the information that you'll use to reach your conclusions or your findings, okay? It might be primary or it might be secondary. In very simple terms, primary data is something that you collect yourself, that is first-hand. Maybe you do it through interviews, maybe you do it through group discussions. Secondary data is something which is already collected for some other purpose by some other agency or some other individual, and you use it for your own research. For example, census is done by the Indian government. However, because it entails a lot of details about the Indian population, you might use census for something that you are researching on as a source of data, and it will be your secondary data. On the other hand, primary data would be the data that you would go and collect yourself on the field. One note of caution here, primary data doesn't always have to come from the people. Depending on your research, it might be a book, it might be news pieces, it might be, for example, if you're engaging in legal research, it might be a piece of legislation. So yeah, the primary data is the first-hand unit that you are going to analyze or use as evidence for your research. Then you have participants or respondents, depending on, again, which research approach you are adopting. People who will provide you the information that you need are called your participants or your respondents, the people you're interviewing, the people you're giving your survey questionnaires to, the people who are participating in the discussions that you are arranging. Those are your participants or respondents. Then there are variables. So variables are basically the units or the concepts which are measured, which you measure for your research to reach your conclusion. For example, if I am researching the impact of coffee on the quality of sleep, then my main variables would be maybe coffee, the intake of coffee, the amount of coffee, consumed by participants, and their quality of sleep. Again, how I measure the quality of sleep depends on what research I'm doing and what discipline I'm from, but then let's not go into that. So then those are our variables, things that we'll measure, and then between which we will establish or we intend to establish or test the relationship. Variables may be dependent or independent. Dependent is when, for example, if I am saying that quality of sleep is dependent on the amount of coffee that one consumes, then quality of sleep is my dependent variable, while the amount of coffee consumed is my independent variable, where it is not affected by the other variables that I'm measuring, while the dependent variable is impacted by the independent variables that all this, if it sounds a little confusing, you may not need, for right now, you do not need to know the nitty-gritties of this, but I think you should know, at least at the outset, you should know what it means, so that if you're reading about it or if you're attending further sessions, you just have some idea about what is being talked about. So a hypothesis, this again, depending on what kind of research you're engaging in, is an important term. Hypothesis is basically an assumption that you are going to test, okay? I am using the term assumption here. For example, if I am saying, again, going back to my coffee and sleep example, if I am saying that the amount of coffee consumed affects the quality of sleep, that is my hypothesis. I do not know it for sure yet because I've not done the research. I do not have the data. I've not run my statistical tests, but I know it because maybe through my personal experience, maybe through the literature that I have read, maybe through the other studies that I have read. And that is my hypothesis. That is a relationship that I established to test through my research. Okay. Not all researchers need to have a hypothesis. However, most of them, depending on the approach that you're taking, do have an hypothesis and tested through the analysis, and that establishes your result. Cases. So cases here would just mean the units that are providing you the information or, that you are studying, those which are providing you the data. So here again, it might be confusing between, you might get confused between cases and participants, but let me make it clear. For example, if I'm studying 10 schools in Delhi, what kind of physical training is done in 10 schools in Delhi. So each of the school is my case. Okay, I'm studying the schools. I'm studying the quality of physical training given in the schools. However, the participants would again be the students that are there in the schools, the physical trainer or the PT, instructor who's there, or maybe the principal or other teachers. Those will be my participants and respondents. However, my case is the school because that is the basic unit whose information I am collecting, and it's not the individual. I'm not concerned about the individual participant. I'm concerned about the role of the individual participant in that school in physical training. Sample is a part of the population that will provide your responses. That is your participants and respondents. For example, if I am doing a research on, again, if I want to do a research on physical training or physical training in schools in Delhi, So all the schools, that means that whatever my findings are, I'll probably apply them to all the schools in Delhi. However, I cannot go for whatever reason, for the reasons of constraint of time, maybe funds. I cannot go to every school and collect my data. Therefore, what I do, I decide to choose certain schools from the pool of schools in Delhi, which provide physical training. And I choose certain schools which will, act as my case and which will provide me with my participants. Okay. Opposed to this, this kind of research is the census, where everybody, like where I would go to each school and collect data from each school in Delhi. That would be a census where all of the population which you are researching is actually a part of your research, actually provides you with data. However, mostly what's done is we choose a sample from a larger pool of population and take information from. Is it clear till here before I go into the next two terms? Any questions? Or is it too boring?
No questions yet, ma'am.
Okay, so the next two terms are actually philosophical terms which are very common in research, especially when we talk about the methodology and approach of any research. So the first one is ontology. I would rather go to the next slide and show you this image. So the first one is ontology. In the image, it's the one below. So ontology refers to the nature of existence of knowledge or the nature of reality that we believe. So as a researcher or through my discipline, the training of whatever discipline I belong to, I may believe that either reality exists independently of human interpretation and human, understanding. So whether I believe, so if I say that there's a tree out of the window, the objectivist ontology would believe that the tree exists whether I see it or not, or whether I am there or not. Whereas subjectivist ontology, which is also called constructionist ontology, that would believe that the tree exists or the tree is a tree only because I believe it to be so. For example, I named it a tree. Again, there are schools of thought within this continuum. It's not so black and white that the tree exists and the tree does not exist. There are different positions on it. But the basic idea would be objectivist ontology would believe that if the reality exists independent of what humans know or do not know, whereas the constructionist ideology believe that whatever we know is our own construction. We humans have, made these constructs to understand the reality, and with the difference, if we change the concept constructs to which we see the world, the knowledge that we have might change. So ontology deals with reality and what is there to know. So this is how I keep it clear in my head. Ontology refers to what is there to know. Epistemology, on the other hand, refers to how we know what we know. A theory of how we construct our knowledge or how we receive the knowledge. So objectivist epistemology, mostly in line with the objectivist ontology, believes that since the reality exists independently of whatever humans believe or know, it can be assessed objectively, it can be measured, and it remains the same over time, and it can be measured, it can be quantified, and we can, and no matter who measures it, it remains constant. On the other hand, the interpretivist or the subjectivist epistemology believes that as the reality is constructed by humans, it's on us. We construct the concepts of how to know of what exists. What we know is also through our own interpretations of what we see and what we know. So not everything is measurable, not everything remains constant over time. Maybe if I am seeing something, I may see something else. I may see a tree while somebody else whose context is completely different, who has learned about trees differently, might see it as a, as a maybe something sacred and not just a tree. I hope it makes sense. It's a little confusing, especially for those who are listening about it for the first time. But just a simple thought, there are two main branches to the theory of knowledge. One basically believes that the reality exists independent of humans and independent of what we know, and therefore it's measurable, it's quantifiable, it's fixed. On the other hand, the other school believes that the knowledge is based on human experience, human interpretation, and therefore no knowledge, there is no one truth, there is no one fixed knowledge, and depending on who finds that knowledge or who is interpreting whatever is present, the knowledge would differ. Is it any thoughts on this, please? No? Okay. I just hope I'm not confusing you too much, but yeah. Okay. So since we have discussed some of the key terms, I can now come on to research methodology or design. So research methodology is basically just a set of values, methods, procedures that we follow during a research study or research project that we are undertaking. It may differ across disciplines. It may differ from researcher to researcher. Within disciplines, there are differences. Okay, so a same project which is being done by a sociologist and which is being done by a psychologist might differ completely. So yeah.
Bhavya, sorry
Yes?
to interrupt you. Before you go ahead, there is a query from Pooja Yadav. She's requesting to explain ontology and epistemology more precisely.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't see it in the chat.
That's okay. Also, guys, I'll just take a couple of minutes and make one announcement. These lectures will have a little more importance for you in terms of your academic perspectives. So I request you all to focus on these research methodology based lectures, which will be there for next week, which will be there till next week. So if you have any doubts or any queries, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you.
So coming to ontology and epistemology again, let me put it this way. Ontology क्या है? Ontology is the nature of reality क्या है? What can we know about them? Okay, हम क्या जान सकते हैं? हम क्या सीख सकते हैं? हम क्या पता कर? तो इसमें while there are many schools of thought, again I am putting it again this way. Black and white nahi hai. It's not like कि objectivist or subjectivist or khatam hai. There's no other way. There are middle grounds. There are discussions that are raging in the research field, in the academics. Okay, but just since it's just the beginning, I just want to state it in very simple terms. दो schools of thought है majorly. एक कहता है कि जो reality है वो fixed है, ठीक है? तो अगर for example एक पेड़ है तो वो सबके लिए एक पेड़ ही है. There's a tree, it's a tree for everybody. Okay, and the tree exists in spite or despite of whatever you may think about it. Okay, ये है ontology. ये है objectivist ideology, objectivist approach. On the other hand, जो subjectivist approach है, जिसे मैं interpretivist या फिर constructionist approach भी कह रही हूँ, that believes कि वो जो tree है, it exists. Okay, physically it might exist, it does exist, but उसको हम लोग क्या समझेंगे, हम उससे क्या knowledge लेंगे, that depends on the person who's deriving that knowledge. For example, for somebody like me, who's who's into the modernist approach hai mera, and I believe that it is a tree, it is a living being, it grows in the soil, बड़ा होता है, and it uses the sunlight as for photosynthesis, and it grows based on that. ठीक है, ये मेरा एक view हो सकता है. तो ऑब्जेक्टिविस्ट एंटोलॉजी कहता है कि यही एक व्यू है which exists. Okay, ये एक सच है which exists, and all the other things are, you know, maybe myths or maybe not true or just false conceptions or whatever. ये एक सच है. On the other hand, subjectivist या interpretivist school कहता है कि वो जो ट्री है वो आपके लिए एक ट्री है which grows in the soil, which does photosynthesis, feeds on, grows on that, derives its nutrients from that. However, for somebody else, maybe from somebody who has not gone through the traditional, not the traditional, the modern schooling, that tree might be a symbol of, might be a religious symbol. It might be a God's gift, जो maybe बढ़ रहा है because उसमें पानी दे रहा है, maybe there's some divine intervention for its growth. Okay, and it's not a living thing. Maybe it's just something to be prayed from, or maybe what do you say, treated as a holy sacred entity. ठीक है, तो ये फर्क है. तो अब इंटरप्रेटिविस्ट ऑन्टोलॉजी ये कहेगी कि ये जो दोनों व्यूज हैं दे नॉट रॉन्ग. ठीक है, दे कम फ्रॉम योर सिस्टम ऑफ थॉट्स. आपने जो सीखा है, आपने जो देखा है, आप उसकी बेसिस पे इंटरप्रेट कर रहे हो व्हाटएवर यू आर सीइंग. ठीक है. ऑन द अदर हैंड ऑब्जेक्टिविस्ट एपिस्टेमोलॉजी कहेगी कि एक ही सच है, और जो बाकी जो आप इसको बिलीव कर रहे हो टू बी a sacred symbol or a holy thing, that is not true. That's just a result of your ignorance. So again, this is a very crude example just to make it clear, क्योंकि ये जो इसका division है, it's not so clear all the time. तो ये when you go into social research, especially जब आप sociological या फिर anthropological research में जाते हैं, then these become very important. क्योंकि तब then what approach you adopt as a researcher will affect what interpretations you're making out of the data that you have, and what okay. And again, ठीक है, तो ये I think objectivist and interpretivist तो clear हो गया है. Going on to ontology and epistemology. Ontology is कि आप क्या जान सकते हो. ठीक है, what is there to know, कि वो पेड़ है वो कैसे बढ़ता है. Maybe for example, going back to that tree example, how does it grow? That's the thing to be known. ठीक है, and वो आप उस पेड़ के बारे में जानना चाहते हो. So ontology would say that you can know it through certain measures. आपको ontology is what we can know. So we can know कि वो पेड़ है, exist करता है कि नहीं है, वो कैसे बढ़ता है, क्या है, ये सब. This is all we want to. This is all we can know. ठीक है. On the other hand, epistemology is how do you get to know what you get to know. जो आप जान सकते हो, what you can learn about the tree, how will you know that? So epistemology maybe will say that you will observe the tree and you will take measurements, and you will measure the girth of the stem, or maybe you will measure the number of leaves. तो वो आप कैसे जानोगे? The process of reaching that knowledge is your epistemology. On the other hand, that knowledge which you want to get is your ontology. Okay, I hope now it's clear. So Pooja says thanks, so I'm assuming that it's clear to her. If there's any more questions about this, please feel free to ask. Again, this is a little confusing, I know, I'm sorry, but this is important when we talk about research, so I had to get into. Okay. So since there are no more questions in the chat and nobody is speaking up, I'll move forward.
Ma'am, shall I? I have one doubt.
Yes, please.
I'm LC from Mumbai, Tata Institute, research student. Is it like that wherever the measurement will come, then it will go for the quantitative research, and wherever the interpretation will come, it will go to the qualitative research? It's like doubt for the ontology.
Mostly like that. However, as I'm saying, it's not always very clear. The divisions are not very clear, especially when we get to methods approach, which we'll discuss shortly. There might be a mix of approaches. Usually it is like that when we are going for measurements, we are going for quantitative approach, and when we are going into interpretation, it's mostly associated with qualitative. However, when we do mixed methods, we do adopt both the approaches simultaneously, and they might just work very good together also. So it depends on the nature of your questions, where you're situated, what disciplines you're from. So it affects, a lot of things affect the approach that you'll take. However, mostly, to be at this level, to be very clear, mostly what you are, if you're going into measurements, it will be a quantitative approach where mostly you'll take an objectivist epistemology and ontology. While if you are going into the interpretations of the data that you're collecting, it will be more or less subjective.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So going into research methodology or design. So as I said, the methodology is a set of values, methods, and procedures that you follow during your research project or study. It will guide what kind of data you will collect, how you will do that. So again, these are divided on different bases, which we'll get into in the next slide. But these divisions are not always clear, since they might be cross-fitting, they might overlap, as when we discuss the next slide. I hope I'll give you some examples to make that clear. And these typologies are based on different criteria. Let's see how. So here are the types of research. This first slide, this one, is the criteria on which the types of research are divided. Okay. So these are very crude, again, divisions, and these are based on, as I have mentioned, the sources on two authors who have written on social research, Newman and Bryman. But there you might find, depending on where you're reading from, you might find different typologies. And on the basis of your discipline also, there might be differences. But these are some of the common types that you come across. So I will just go into that. So the first division can be based on the use of findings. That is where you're using the findings of the research project that you're doing. If that finding is only limited to the academic circles, to the academic discussions, for example, you're doing the research for a PhD or maybe for a journal article that you'll publish, it comes into the basic categories. On the other hand, if you're using those findings to evaluate a certain program or to, find a practical solution to a certain problem that a community faces, or it's a social audit which basically measures the social impact of any project which is being implemented, then it comes under the applied form of research. Okay? So use of findings, if it's only for academic discussion or knowledge promotion, it's basic. On the other hand, if it has practical application, so to say, then it comes under the applied research category. Again, a research can have both uses. It might apply to a certain context and solve a certain social problem that exists there, while also enhancing the knowledge and maybe promoting academic discussion. Then the purpose of the research. Here, the purpose means what kind of questions you are asking in your research. Are you describing a situation, describing a phenomena, who, what, how? Okay, then it's a descriptive research. For example, if I am studying, the trends of higher education, the courses that graduate students take up in India. If it's just describing what courses they take up in what percentages and things like that, then it's a descriptive research. An exploratory research, as the name suggests, explores a topic. It's mostly done into the areas where not much data or much research has been already done. And so you are not very sure about what methods to adopt, what kind of data you'll get. So that kind of research is called exploratory. For example, if the initial research that was done into maybe with the coming of the COVID-19 virus, maybe that might come under the exploratory category, because nobody knew much about the virus back then, and a lot of people were trying to figure out how and what its impacts are, and how does it grow, or how does it spread, and all. The third category is the explanatory research, which basically tries to answer the why questions, the causations, explains relationships between two variables. So why and how of why something happens. So if I say that if somebody claims that coffee reduces the quality of sleep, an explanatory research would go into the mechanisms of why that would happen and try to establish that answer. So then the number of units that you're studying, mostly if you're studying one case, as I said, one unit, maybe a school, maybe one life history of one person, then it's a case study research. On the other hand, if you're studying more than one cases, it might be an across case. Usually any cross-sectional research where you have multiple participants is usually an across case study. Or it might be comparative, where you're taking up more than one cases and comparing the situations, or whatever you're studying. So are these three categories, like these three criteria for division, clear? If yes, then I'll go on to the next three. So I am assuming that these are clear. So the next is based on the level of control that the researcher has on the variables that he or she is studying. For example, an experimental research, which is an experimental research would be a research where you can control the variables, you can control certain variables and study the other variables. For example, if I am studying the effect of coffee on sleep, then I have to make sure that all the other variables around which might affect sleep are controlled, are in check, and I know what their impact is. Okay, or I am making sure that their impact does not hamper my results on my study of effect on coffee and sleep. Okay, so for example, quality of sleep may be impacted by stress levels, and may be impacted by the light in the room when somebody is sleeping. But in an experimental setup, I'll make sure that all these things are controlled. All my participants have a similar light, or the lighting is common to all my participants and all such. It's usually done in lab conditions, where it's easier to control the conditions of the participants, the other variables. Non-experimental research is simply where you do not go into comparisons, you do not have a control group, you do not try to control anything, and do the research in a social setting or wherever the phenomena that you're studying is occurring. A quasi-experimental research, which is common in social research, is where maybe you have not made the control groups, where you cannot control all of the variables. However, you are comparing two groups. For example, if I'm studying the effect of certain therapy on patients of depression, and I take up two clinics which are providing different therapies. So here I have not assigned people to the groups. I have not assigned the therapy, but these two different therapies were there being given out to the patients, and I am comparing these two. Okay, so that might be a quasi-experimental, where I have not divided the groups on a random basis, but there are divisions, and I'm assuming that all the other factors might not play a very significant role. I can then find out the impact of each of the therapy that's being given. So one more thing, in experimental research, basically, the most important thing is that the groups that you're studying, the groups that you're comparing, they are randomly assigned, and you make sure that the impact of other variables is minimized, and you provide one group with a certain project or therapy or whatever the impact of what you're going to study, while the other group is not provided the same thing. So you form the groups here, experimental. In quasi-experimental, you might not do that. It might be done automatically, or it might not be random. The group division might not be random. Yeah. The next is the types of research based on the time frame that the research uses. So here the time frame is not only the amount of time taken by that particular research, but how that time is included in the research design. For example, when you start the research, when you're designing the research, do you intend to take data at different points of time? Do you intend to take the data at only one point of time? That is how. So if you're taking the data only at one point of time, then your research is a cross-sectional research, where you go into the field or wherever and collect data at that point, and then analyze that data and give out your results. On the other hand, if you are going to take data, collect data at different points of time, then it's a longitudinal research. Longitudinal researches are not very common because they are costlier and they are more time consuming, since again you have to collect data at certain intervals of time. So there are three types of longitudinal researches. The first one is a time series, where simply you have one question. For example, I will study the preference of higher education courses among Indian youth. Okay, so a time series would be where I collect data for the same question, maybe now in 2022. Then I collect data for the same question in 2032, and then I collect the data for the same question in 2042. So then I can compare how the preference of the youth has changed over the course of these 20 years, or how does it change over the course of every 10 years. And that is how I answer. So here the sample, the participants of your research or the respondents of your research will vary every time. Okay. Then there's a cohort study. A cohort study is where the participants of your research have a very particular common trait. Okay. So for example, if I want to study the impact of education on, impact of or COVID-19 pandemic, or online schools or online classes on these children of, or the students of 10th standard. So now I have a very particular group. I want to study a group of children who were in 10th standard when the pandemic hit in 2020, when the schools went offline and it was the mode of education shifted to online. Okay, so I am very clear here that my participants would be the students who were in class 10th in 2020. Okay, that's my cohort, and in that now I can follow them and see how their choices for further education and maybe career choices changed over time. So I collect data from them now, asking them what were the changes that they experienced. Then I collect data from 10 years from now, seeing what were the other higher education choices they made. And then I collect data from them after 10 more years, seeing what career choices they made and how they have established themselves in whatever career choices. Now here again, so this particular characteristic is very important, that they should have been in 10th standard in 2020 when the pandemic. Okay, so this is the common character here, which defines my study, because that is what I want to study. A panel study is similar to cohort study in the sense, here also I choose a group of people, but But here, that characteristic doesn't have to be so specific. I may just study the impact of COVID-19 on certain people, and I pick up a sample. I have a set of questions. I ask those people, how has it impacted you? Then, but in panel, what is absolutely essential is I follow the same sample when I collect my next set of data in 2032 or in 2042. Okay, so I try to stick to the same sample as far as possible. However, it might not always be possible because again, the participants are humans. They might move, they might not live that long, they might not want to participate in the study. So there are things that might go wrong, and then there are ways to fix it, but then you always try to stick to the same sample. Okay. So the cohort study will give you characteristics, or will you give you results about, the study, how 10th standard was affected and how that effect impacted their further choices. However, a panel study might give impact of COVID-19 on different age groups, on different genders, or whatever. But it will follow the same set of samples. The next is type of data. This is actually, so this is quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods. So as the name suggests, quantitative, and as we also discussed when I was discussing epistemology and ontology, quantitative data is mostly measurable variables. It's more in numbers. It's more of data which can be quantified, which can be analyzed, which can have statistical tests run on them. Qualitative data is data which is more subjective. So you can think of it as in quantitative research, you will maybe give out an objective questionnaire to people where they will have, maybe choose the correct answer or answer in one word. On the other hand, qualitative would be a more subjective interview, more lengthier interview with people who will share their experiences or whatever you are asking in much more detail. And the third is mixed methods, where you basically employ both the approaches. Maybe for some questions you go with quantitative data, for other questions you go for a qualitative data, and you then analyze both of them depending on what kind of data it is and what kind of tests you want to run. Okay. So for example, if I want to study impact of COVID-19 on education, I go out to school students, maybe in high school. I choose a sample, I go out to them in a quantitative study. I would make a questionnaire maybe with a set of 20 questions where I ask them, which might have scales, which might just ask them how many hours did you study, okay, and how did you feel? Did you feel lonely? And there's a scale of not, so they have a simpler one-word sort of answers that they are supposed to give. On the other hand, if I'm doing the same study with a qualitative approach, if I'm collecting qualitative data, I would sit with them. I would ask them, was it lonely? How did you feel? More of in-depth detail on what did they experience during the pandemic. A mixed method study would what would it do? Maybe it would collect the quantitative set of data from a larger sample, and then to go into the details or the experiences, the lived experiences of the children, it would maybe then choose a further smaller sample with whom the researcher would conduct interviews and get detailed data. Okay, is it too confusing? Is it clear? Because we are heading towards the end now, so for today. So if you have any questions, please, I would request you to ask them now. No questions at all? Okay, then. So then I have a small activity for all of you. Akshay, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. The breakout, yes.
Yeah, can we do that? Okay.
Yes, I'll just get, so for all the candidates, we are opening the breakout rooms now, and you will be assigned to the groups automatically. In total, there are 8 groups, and the topic of each group is written on the breakout room. The time limit for breakout rooms is 15 minutes. So as your 15 minutes gets over, you will come back to the main session.
Oh, I'm sorry, Akshay. Before we go into breakout rooms, there's one more thing I need to discuss, and then I'll tell you. I'll tell you the details of the activity that you need to do. Is that
Yeah.
okay, Akshay? Yeah.
Yeah.
So coming to qualitative and quantitative types of research. So this dichotomy in research is again is one which often raises debates. It's not only the type of data. Sorry.
Please continue. Please continue.
I'm sorry, there's something.
Yes, Bhavya, please continue. I muted.
Okay, okay, I just looked into the chat. I just want to say, if you guys are not able to speak, that's okay. You can always use the chat option. If you have questions, then also, and in the activity also, I don't think it's you need to speak a lot. You can use the chat option and maybe just see how it works. If it's not workable, then we'll see what to do. Okay. So yeah, so qualitative and quantitative strategy, these are basically approaches, and it's usually qualitative approach is more or less associated with the interpretivist approach of ontology and epistemology that I was talking about. It's not always, it's not that, again, I'm saying that again, I know I've repeated it quite a few times now, but it's not always very clear, the division. Even if you are doing a qualitative study, you can have objectivist leanings. However, at the basic level, it's how they are divided. So here, this is a table from Newman, which goes into the division between the two. I'm just going over the different the differences that he has stated, and then yeah. So the quantitative approach basically measures objective facts. So it will maybe measure the level of stress or maybe the hours of sleep. The qualitative approach constructs social reality, the cultural meaning. So here, if I'm studying the quality of sleep from a qualitative approach, I'll not just measure the hours of sleep. I'll ask the person, how did you feel? Like, how do you feel when you wake up? Because maybe he slept for 8 hours, he or she slept for 8 hours, but he's not feeling relaxed, or still tired and not feeling like he slept well. It's just, my examples are very crude here, but I hope it just makes things clear for you. So it focuses on variables. Again, variables are the measurable quantities, the measurable constructs that you use for your study. Here, the focus is more on the processes and the events, the feelings, maybe the emotions also sometimes, depending on what you're studying. Reliability is the key factor here. So when we talk about reliability in research, it basically means you're measuring the variables which can be measured over time, which will yield similar results over time and which will hold true. For example, if I'm talking about the hours of sleep, you can measure it every time you are, doing that study with different different set of participants, and the hours will not vary with the participant. The hours are what hours you measure. Okay. Here in the qualitative approach, authenticity is the key. By authenticity, we mean we try to capture what the participant is trying to say, what they feel, what their interpretation. Okay, and we are focusing on that, and it is. So the quantitative approach is often claimed to be value-free. When I say value-free, I mean the researcher is not biased. Biased in the sense he or she is not influenced by his or her own context. Okay, he or she is not letting her or his own beliefs come into the research. Okay, he's not assuming, or she's not assuming, that if I am studying the impact of coffee on sleep, I'm not assuming that coffee is good or bad. Sure. I'm not associating any value with coffee, depending on your research question. In qualitative approach, values are present and explicit. That means the researcher, since she or he comes from a certain context, he or she believes in certain things and makes it clear. For example, if I'm studying child abuse, I come from a context where I believe that child abuse in every situation is wrong. That is my value. Somebody else may not believe so and may believe that, I'm sorry, nobody should believe would believe that. But then, for example, physical punishment. I will go into physical punishment. As a researcher, I may come from a I may come from a position where I believe that physical punishment for children is wrong in every situation, while somebody else who's researching the same issue may believe that physical punishment may work in certain situations and therefore is acceptable in certain situations. Now, these are the values that we as researchers hold and which are not always the same, they're different. But as a researcher, we make it explicit, we mention it, that we believe it through our, so that when we interpret our values, the readers also know where I am coming from. Separate theory and data. Here, it basically means that you have read the theory, you have then you go into the data and assess the data and say that, okay, this was the theory that I read, that coffee has caffeine, which affects the brain cells, and therefore it affects the sleep patterns and quality of sleep. This is the theory which you're going to test. Then you collect the data, you measure the quality of sleep by hours of sleep, brain activity, etc., etc. And then you analyze your data and say, okay, this theory which I mentioned earlier is true or not true. Whereas theory and data and qualitative approach are fused. This is a point which might be clear when you read different kinds of studies. It might come out as it might become clearer to you. Here when we are discussing the data, we are bringing in the theory while discussing the data. Because the data is qualitative, you're discussing what the participants said, you're discussing where the participants said that, in what context. So the theory and data are not very clearly bifurcated when you're writing your research, okay? This quantitative approach claims to be independent of context, whereas qualitative approach is situationally constrained, it's situated in the certain context. So quantitative approach will claim that this test was run and it yielded this result. So no matter where you run these tests, the results should remain same. So if the quantitative study is well designed and it's done with rigor, those no matter where you run those tests, they would yield similar results, or the relationships that you will that you have established will remain. On the other hand, qualitative research is more situationally constrained. The same research questions that I'm asking to somebody in Delhi might yield very different answers when I ask the same questions to somebody in maybe in a remote village in the Northeast somewhere. Usually the quantitative approach has many cases or subjects or respondents. It believes the sample size is large for statistical rigor and for statistical significance and rigor. The sample size is quite large. Qualitative approach usually takes up fewer cases or participants, where we go into detail with them on the issue of research. The kind of analysis run on quantitative data and in quantitative studies is statistical. So you'll go into maybe a correlation test or maybe an ANOVA or different statistical tests you may run depending on what you are trying to find out. The analysis in qualitative approach is more thematic, where you will when you are reading the data, you'll code it for different themes, you'll identify different common themes across the cases or across the participants. You will maybe identify differences in their responses, the kinds of words they have used, depending on what kind of analysis you're doing. Here, the researcher is detached. Again, to say the researcher acts as an outside observer, where if I am the researcher, I'm not involved in what the participants are saying or doing, or I'm not letting my values or biases, my assumptions to come in, and I'm just taking data as it is. analyzing it through statistics or whatever tests I have to run, and writing it as it is. I have minimal role to play. Whereas in qualitative approach, first thing, because when you're collecting data, you are talking to the person so much, you are asking for so much detail about whatever phenomena. For example, if I am talking about impact of COVID and I'm talking to somebody about that, as a researcher, I am also a listener to what they're saying, and I cannot remain completely detached. And also similarly, the approach itself says that the knowledge that we are getting is interpreted. So the researcher is involved in interpretation of what the participants have said as, described as their experiences. Okay. So these are the very broad differences that these approaches take. These are not necessarily, there's not necessarily one good or one bad approach. It depends on the type of questions you're asking, what you want to know, what is the purpose of what you want to know. So maybe if you are just exploring something, you don't know much about it, maybe a qualitative approach will help you find out more concepts about that particular thing, or you'll be able to go into more detail about that phenomena that you do not know much about through a qualitative approach. On the other hand, if you are establishing causations, if you are answering the why question, if something causes something or not, or if something affects something or not, for example, if gender affects income, that is a question you would like to answer through a quantitative approach, where you would want to have a larger data set where you can run a statistical test and ensure if there's a relation between the two or not. So yeah, that's all for the presentation. Let's go into the activity now. So it's just this very simple activity where if you have understood the types of research that I explained, I would just so Akshay will divide you into breakout rooms where you can see the different types of studies that I've written. You just have to come up with one research idea which you can do or which you can pursue through this type of study. For example, when I say a panel study, for example, if group one has to come up with an idea for a panel study, they may you just have to come up with an idea. For example, you can use a panel study for maybe you, again, going into the COVID thing, and that's the most easily available example I have right now. So you may just want to study the impact of COVID-19 on the life of people in Delhi in the longer term. Okay, just a basic idea that you would want to explore, or which you can explore through this type of study. Is it clear what you have to do? Nothing very complicated. You will have 10 minutes. I think that's enough.
Can I open the rooms, Bhavya?
If nobody has any questions, you can please. I hope they'll know will they know which study they have to
Yes,
or will you tell them? Will you tell them in each group?
So in each breakout room, the breakout room's name has been changed to the type of study that they're supposed to discuss.
So how much time do we have left? Is it 20 minutes?
We have 20 minutes left. So
okay. So maybe then a quick.
I'll just give 10 minutes. Yes, 10 minutes for breakout rooms.
And then we can have a discussion for another 10 minutes, or maybe if everybody is comfortable, another 15, 20 minutes. There are any questions?
Yeah. So I'll open the rooms now.
Okay, thank you.
मीनू जी, आप कुछ कहना चाह रही हैं?
Yes, I except for Lavansh and Himani, no one is responding. Lavansh has shared that he's in the classroom. So I guess
It's okay.
I don't know.
Whoever is in classroom or in university right now can type in the chat boxes whatever their points are, and you guys can continue the discussion. So even if there are only 2 or 3 active people, you guys can do your discussion
Okay,
and discuss it in the main session when the session ends. But this
sure.
is the activities for your understanding. So no matter how many people are there, just continue with the activity. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, sure.
Like situation should not vary that I'm collecting data during the first
government policies are impacting how government policies are impacting them over a period of time, or maybe the perception they face over a period of time, or some
Are you guys done with the discussion? आप लोगों का डिस्कशन हो गया है क्या?
नो नो नो,
हाँ,
नहीं हुआ है। मैंने
आप लोग
आस्क किया किसी से, पर किसी ने कुछ रिप्लाई नहीं किया।
आप लोगों के ग्रुप से किसी का रिप्लाई नहीं आया है? हेमा जी, साक्षी, नीलाक्ष, आप लोग हैं यहाँ पे?
मैंने पूछा डिस्कशन के लिए, पर किसी ने रिप्लाई नहीं किया सर।
सर अरुण सर म्यूट पर हैं सर आप।
There is no audio for a while, तो मैं तो बैठा ही हूँ. I'm not waiting.
नहीं नहीं, आई गेट इट। एक्चुअली मैंने आपको गलती से असाइन कर दिया, आपको मेन सेशन में ही रहना था। आई बिकॉज ऑटोमेटिकली होना चाहिए, वो हुआ नहीं, सो बाय मिस्टेक।
No, don't worry. It's fine. Not a problem.
Bhavya, participants, we will be back in a few seconds. So after that, we can continue. Bhavya, are you there? Bhavya?
Yes, I am here.
Okay. Okay.
Is everybody back or?
Yes, everyone is back.
Okay, so can each like maybe any one of you from each group can volunteer and just state what are the ideas that you came up with, or if you have any questions. These are the last 10-15 minutes that we'll engage in here. So please feel free to write in the chat or maybe speak up if you have any questions. Yes, Saksham, I see you've raised your hand.
Yes, so our area of research was panel study. And if we have understood it correctly, it means a longitudinal study over a period of time in which we can have the same set of participants being studied over a period of time, or we can have different set of participants being studied at a regular interval, right?
No, so in a panel study, you'll have the same set of participants
Okay,
being
we'll have the
studied
same
over
set
a
of
period.
participants.
Yeah, same set.
So,
So a panel study, basically the characteristic is that you try to stick to the same sample, throughout
okay.
your study.
So in that we were thinking how attitudes towards how a person with disability over a period of time perceives the attitude of people around him towards his or her disability and the opportunities which are provided to him, or the denial of opportunities. So something on these lines we were thinking, if we do it on different set of participants at regular interval, what would that be called?
That would be a time series where the sample changes and you are
Yes.
just measuring, you are just, measuring or
So
studying the attitudes.
another idea which came to our mind was about the employment opportunities that are available to persons with disability. So maybe that data can be collected over a gap of 1 year, 5 year, 10 year regularly from maybe employment exchanges or the data which would be available publicly, or we can collect data and then do a study on that. That is another idea which came to our mind.
If you do this one, where you collect data from, various websites, then that would be a time series that you do. That, okay, it has changed so much in 5 years.
Yeah.
But if it has to be a panel study, you'll follow a set of sample, maybe a set of people with certain disabilities, and you'll see how their educational qualifications, or maybe their age, or maybe their experiences, what you said, like in the first example, and you see how those things have affected their attitudes, or towards how people see them or their disability. So the characteristic of panel study is that you follow the same sample and see how their circumstances or whatever conditions that have come about have changed whatever you're trying to study over the years. Yeah.
Okay.
I hope that's clear.
Saksham and me were discussing this thing only, that this employment thing, with this employment thing, that we will take sample of some person with disabilities, and then we will we research on them for several years on what are the things which are coming as a barrier to them to getting the employment, and because there must be some variables which affect their job opportunities and in their work environment. So what are the challenges?
If you do that with the same sample, then it would be a panel study. I said it would be a time series if you did it with a set of data taken from the government
I
website or
was
different
thinking about the
sources.
longitudinal idea.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's how. Anything else from group one? Anybody else?
Hi, this is from group 2.
Yeah.
My name is Akshata. I'm from Bangalore. So
Yeah,
we have
Akshata.
got this cross-sectional study. So what I understand from cross-sectional study is that it is an observational study that evaluates and compares different groups at the same point of time. Am I right?
Yeah, when you say it compares different groups, it may not always be the case. Cross-sectional, when we say it's just about that you collect the data, at only one point of time. You'll not collect data over the years for the same.
So with this understanding, that kind of discussion we did, and the topic that we thought of was we thought of this COVID situation during the second wave. And then we collect data of people from different parts of the country at that particular time, that is second wave. So a study of that, like say north, south of India, north of India, and the east and west of India. So will that be a cross-sectional study, ma'am, if I'm not wrong?
Yeah, that's totally fine. And this actually, your example makes it very clear that when I was discussing the types, I mentioned that those are the divisions are not always clear. So if some study is cross-sectional, doesn't mean that it cannot be comparative. Okay. It will not be longitudinal because then you're collecting the data only once, but it can be all the other types also. So it can be a comparative study, but the main characteristic when I say cross-sectional is that the data has to come only once. And not over the years.
Okay.
When I say not over the years, so it depends on your the length of study also. It doesn't have to be that you have to do it. Let's not confuse it. But then in the longitudinal, the design says that you will ask the same question again after a gap of certain time to see a change. While in a cross-sectional study, you'll not ask the same questions again to see the difference in response over the years or over time.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
I hope that's clear.
Yeah.
Dr. Satyam, you have raised your hand.
Hello.
Please. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening. Our group discussion was on explanatory research. For simple definition of it's anything that is explained in detail that was not explained clearly or more deeper point of view that can be included in explanatory research.
Yes, it can be, but it has to explain something. Like
yes,
when I say
on a
explain, it
specific
has to go
topic.
into maybe the cause. Yeah. Maybe go into the cause, because see, on a specific please maybe just just tell me what you guys discussed, and then
I can give an example, ma'am. For example, whenever a new shoe comes into a market, it is explained on ergonomic point of view or the design point of view. But for more explaining the cause why it has come, or from the point of if any of it is made for differently able, then their psychology after using it, more explaining how to keep its safety measures or cleanliness point of view, giving more sides of that product by everyone's point of view, or explaining in more detail how to keep it more durability or how it can be more effective. That can be more explanatory for that point of that product.
Satyam, actually here, see, when I say explanatory in a research, it's more related to the cause and effect of certain things. Okay, so when you're saying that you're researching the use of certain product, or the experience that people have with that product, that can either be exploratory if that product is very new and you do not know what people responses to it would be in general. Okay, or it could be descriptive, where you're describing how people have experienced that product. Are you getting my point?
Yes, ma'am.
When I'm saying explanatory, then you are going deeper into the cause, that if people, so maybe an earlier study stated that this certain product is not causing discomfort for some people. Okay, for a large number of people, or maybe 90% of the users felt that it was not compatible. Okay, that is a earlier study that you came across about that product. Now, if you want to go into an explanatory study, you would go and ask, why was that discomfort caused? Okay, what was the causes? What were the causes that the people said that, you know, it was uncomfortable or not comfortable or whatever, or those who said comfortable, why? So maybe you will, here it's mostly the quantitative statistical analysis that you would run, where you will say that, okay, the variable is the comfort or discomfort of the product. The dependent variable is this, while the independent variables, you could go into whatever, maybe the ergonomics, maybe the cost, maybe the design or whatever. I'm just thinking of aspects that I can about a random product. But am I making it clear? It goes more into the causation, why something happens the way that it happens. Okay.
Yes,
So if theory says that coffee affects sleep, then an descriptive study would just what it would do would study the sleep patterns of certain people and their consumption, and then say that, okay, this was there was an effect. While an explanatory study would go into why that effect was caused. Okay, so it would go into more into the why and how.
One more example, ma'am, could be if one earlier study is done and we have seen the limitations, or after that study seen some questions more explaining those why that phenomena has happened, that can be an explanatory study on the previous study.
Yes, that can be an explanatory study. So again, when you're going into the details of why some phenomena is occurring or what is causing that phenomena, then that's an explanatory study.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Ikramul, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am, right. You did it right. Okay. The topic of our discussion is quasi-experimental research.
Okay.
It involves manipulation of independent variables to observe the effect of dependent variables. To give an example, if for example, if there is a patient and he is suffering from a very pain, and if somebody is giving a painkiller to the patient, and what is the effect after giving the painkiller? So painkiller, here is the independent variables, and the patient, he or she is the dependent variables. So when I give the independent variables, the painkiller to the dependent variables to the patient, what is the effect of that? That is the main purpose of the quasi-experimental research. To give another example, for example, if a child is crying, and if I am giving a ice cream to the child, so we see the difference, and to observe the effect of that kind of reaction of the response. And another example, for example, there are a child in the street, so they are hungry, and we are giving foods to them. So to observe the effect of the that particular dependent variables to the independent variables, this is the main purpose of this quasi-experimental research. This is what I understood.
Okay, so the purpose is to understand the effect. That's true.
To observe
to observe the impact. So, but then if in quasi-experimental and also in experimental, what is also important is there is a comparative group that you compare the impact with. Okay. For example, if when you said that you're giving painkillers to somebody who is suffering from pain. I'm sorry, somebody saying some.
Okay. No, ma'am. I was talking to my friend. Okay, ma'am. Continue, please, ma'am.
So if you're saying that you are considering the impact of a certain painkiller on the patient, then for comparison, you also have to have a group where that painkiller is not being given. Okay. Are you getting my point? Usually there's a
actually, ma'am. I was on the street, so I was not able to listen the lecture perfectly. So this is what I know. Okay. You can understand.
That's totally
Okay, ma'am.
that's totally fine because obviously I know there was a lot to process in the whole, but then I thought maybe you had a discussion in the group and whatever. So
Yes, there is some of them are in the metro, some are in the library.
Okay,
yes, ma'am.
no problem. These are the side effects of online sessions. Anyway, yeah. Anybody else? Any other group? Or if you have any questions regarding anything, the presentation today, because the next lecture on Friday that we have, we'll go into the methods and tools, not again too much into detail, a very basic session, the steps of research, and what are the different kinds of analysis and how do you disseminate or write research. Before that, if any, before we end the session, any other groups, what discussions you had, if you had any?
Hi. Hello.
So you both of you can decide amongst yourself who goes first. So Nilaksh, will you go ahead? No. Meenu, Nilaksh, somebody?
Yes,
Hello?
okay.
Yeah,
Hi.
you can speak.
Okay, sure, thank you. So my name is Meenu, and my group was assigned basic research. So I guess basic research is also called pure or fundamental research, where we try to find something, try to actually gain some knowledge, try to better our understanding on the concept or a certain phenomena. So our group has decided. So one example that we could think upon was how stress level impacts the mental and physical well-being of the university students.
So that's totally fine, because as I said, as you said, basic research is pure research, which tries to further our knowledge in a certain area.
Yes.
And again, there can be a mix of types.
Yes.
Basic research can again be a longitudinal study or a cross-sectional study. It might compare cases, or
it can be qualitative, it can be quantitative.
Yes.
So yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nilaksh?
Yes, my question was actually according to the there is a thing in the disabled researcher, especially in Western, like in Britain or USA. So when I was in a webinar and I raised this question about able person doing disabled research. So they went quite hostile regarding that, and they said
I'm
that.
sorry, Nilaksh, can you please repeat? When you were in the webinar, can you please repeat? I'm sorry.
They were saying, so I was saying that how about then how should a abled researcher should do a disabled research? So so I find that those disabled researchers are quite hostile regarding the abled researcher, and they think that the abled researcher could be some bias, or maybe they won't justify the cause of the disabled research as such. So what do you think about that hostility? Are they really mean justifiable, or we can what are the things that should able researchers should take into account before doing their disabled research?
Okay. I think this is a very important question, not only from the point of view of disability or ability, but a lot of there is this way where we a lot of groups which were not so prominent in research are now coming forward in the education field and taking up their own issues for research, and therefore this question has come up quite a few times, that if you do not belong to a certain group, can you actually research with them, or can you actually justify their causes? I do not know about their hostility. I'm sorry, I cannot comment on that. However, I do not, as a researcher, I do not believe that somebody who does not have any disability cannot research on the issue, because But when you do it, it is important to, for example, if I am researching some disability as a researcher, it's important for me to accept it that my view of disability would be very different from somebody who has a disability, or who, you know, who has lived that certain condition. Okay, so as I said, as I was mentioning, that your values, your own beliefs, your own context becomes important here, because the way you will view things, maybe the things that would come across as very day-to-day or normal, or maybe non-offensive to you, might not come across the same way for the other person. So as a researcher, if I do not believe that you cannot do research on that topic, you can. And I hope that people present here would agree with me on that, because otherwise then research becomes a very niche area. And as a maybe because I do not have any other issues, I can only research on maybe I don't know, my area of my research gets very limited. But as a researcher, you have to be conscious of the fact that the way you see things and the way they say your participants might see things may vary, and you have to acknowledge that when you are researching in your proposal, in your methodology. Maybe it's a good idea that you get your research idea or proposal reviewed by somebody who's an expert in the area, and you know, can tell you that okay, these are the things that you are maybe missing out, and you may be not thinking about. And then there are the issue of ethics which come up, especially when you're researching with certain communities or groups of people, which you have to consider how and why, and how will you ensure their participation, how will you ensure that their voices actually come across. These are the issues that are more and more relevant in qualitative approach. However, they're equally considerable in quantitative approach. And we'll touch upon research ethics in the next session, which are key to any research, according to me, and you know, need due consideration in any research project that you plan. On this, I am not an expert, so anybody who would like to contribute here is welcome. And I see that Saksham has raised his hand, so please go ahead.
Yes, actually, this is something which I was also perplexed by a lot, because I am from literature and we usually focus on various marginalities. So we might be focusing on Dalit literature or women's literature or racial aspects in literature. So when we now there's this idea about the lived experience of a person. So from which particular identity you are coming in, the idea of identity politics itself. And in that, being a male, maybe I would not be able to understand the kind of circumstances which a female faces. Being a upper caste person, maybe I would not be able to understand what difficulties a Dalit person faces, or maybe LGBTQIA community faces. When I started doing research in disability, I felt the same apprehension about whether being I would not classify myself as non-disabled, but maybe I don't have benchmark disability. So now in that situation, what came to my rescue when I had this ethical dilemma was the idea of, first of all, temporarily abled bodies. That all of us, in one way or another, in one set of our life, phase of our life, maybe in old age, we would our bodies might face some type of disability or impairment. Second, which came to my mind was that maybe there is an invisible disability which is not visible to another person, but or I might be maybe I want to. There's this concept of passing, that I might be disabled, but that disability is invisible, and I'm trying to pass off myself as non-disabled. So all these ideas, when combined to, I think, when we cannot label a person as non-disabled merely because there is no visible disability in that person. And second, this is something which I got from my supervisor. He's blind, and he pointed out that then the entire concept of integration, inclusiveness, it is defeated if we start creating these binaries of disabled and non-disabled. So that is something which I thought about, and maybe someone else can also point out whether it's correct or incorrect, or if provide some viewpoints on this.
Thank you very much, Saksham, for actually sharing that, because that, I think, answers Nilaksh's question very well. And I agree with you, because see, when we talk about identity, it's always, it's not rigid, right? We do not have one identity, and the idea of identity itself is fluid. It must stay that way. And in research, especially in qualitative research, we discuss about this idea of insider and outsider perspective. Again, it's a continuum where both the views are actually important. Okay, both perspectives are important. Both perspectives have their own pros and cons. Both perspectives bring out different things. And I think limiting yourself to studying only something that you can directly relate to defeats the purpose of actually learning, because if you are researching something that you have not lived, or maybe you've not experienced, it's only through research that you can actually learn so much about it, and you can understand the issues better. And yeah.
In fact, another of my professors, he was working on Vietnam war. So I asked him, he's an Indian. So I asked him, you are not American, you are not Vietnamese. So you are an outsider. How can you do research on that particular area? So he pointed out that his supervisor had told him that actually outsiders bring a fresh perspective, which maybe people who are insiders may not be able to look at. So we come with a fresh set of eyes. So that might be able to create new problems, new problematics, which we then can together try to resolve.
Exactly. So yeah. So I'm sorry, we are running short of time. So if there are any immediate questions, or you can, if there's something you would like to discuss, we can keep it for the next session. However, before I will let you any of you speak, Pooja has actually requested me to shed some light on contemporary trend in disability studies. So I would just say that I am not an expert in the area. However, I will look if I can find something, and I'm sure Akshay can find you better resource persons for that. But I will try to find what I can and share with you. And yeah, but that's not my area of expertise. Let me be very clear. I don't want to mislead any of you. Yeah. I have worked with tribes.
Bhavya, we lost you.
Now, I'm sorry. Where?
You have worked with tribes.
Am I audible now? So I was just saying that I have worked with tribes, and I am currently working with children. So disability is not particularly my area, but I'll try and see what I can bring regarding that in the next session. And but I am getting messages for a wrap up now. So any questions, if you have one last question, or
let me
just
jump in there.
We can take up.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting you. Let me just jump in. Any further questions, guys, we can take in the next lecture, or you guys can email it to me or put it on the WhatsApp group, and I'll forward it to Ms. Bhavya. Or you guys can take it up in the next lecture, which is on 11th of March. Ms. Bhavya is the resource person for that lecture too. So I'm sorry, Bhavya, I had to stop you. Yeah.
That's okay. That's okay.
So moving towards the end of the lecture for today, I would like to thank Arunji and Preetiji for their very kind support and their patience, and their for helping us with the lectures for the ongoing certificate course. Thank you, Bhavya, for coming in and for patiently discussing minute details of the research methodologies for all of us. And thanks to all the participants for being here patiently. And I know you guys have your colleges, your universities, and your work. And coming for a lecture after that, I get it. It's not an easy thing to do. So thank you all. And regarding the issue that you guys are having for the lectures, since some of you have exams, So I request whoever has an issue or whoever is requesting for a shift of lectures, kindly email it to our email, official email ID, that is courses.disabilitystudies@gmail.com. And then we will get on a discussion on it, and we'll see what we can do, because moving the lectures to April is not an optimal option for us. So we will have to find a solution which is feasible for everyone. So we'll do that, don't worry. Just write an email, whoever is having difficulties, and we'll work on it. Again, thank you everyone. Thank you for coming. See you on Friday, 5:30 p.m. same time. Thank you. Thank you, Bhavya.
Thank you. Hope to see you on Friday, all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bhavya. Thank you, Arunji. Thank you, Preeti ji. Thank you.